5. Orientation on the surface and in space. Articulation of the pictorial whole, the scene. Dimensions on the surface and in space. Orientation on the surface. The scene is the surface, more precisely, the bounded plane. Two questions must be asked. What enters and where does it enter? The regular division yields the proportion to right or left, above or below. Point P is spatially determined in two dimensions. First, by its position with regard to above and below. Second, with regard to left and right. The dimensions on the surface always turn up in pairs on either side of the center. Polarities are present as in the case of good and evil. The form produced on the surface is based on a function. A spiritual function requires expression. This expression is based on the elements, dematerialized elements. The required expression is obtained not by material, but by ideal means. The ideal elements liberate the expression and fix it clearly on the plane. Notation in manuscript. To paint well is simply this: to put the right color in the right place. Accident. Tempera and crayon on white underpainting. Exchange of the dimensions that govern our natural sense of up and down. In the dimensions of the plane, determination of position by means of coordinates. Coordinates. Abscissa. Ordinate. Here, the position of P is given by its position above, below the abscissa, and its position to the left, right of the ordinate. Above and to the left, below and to the right. Orientation in space. In fixing a point in space, we must consider the dimension in front, behind, as well as the two above-mentioned dimensions. In this case, the point P is fixed with respect to three dimensions. From the spatial point of view, P is also localized by its position in front of or behind the coordinate plane. In front. Behind. Italian City, watercolor, 1928. Summing up these directions, we obtain the following picture in space. In this case, the point P is fixed with respect to three dimensions: left, right, above, below, in front, behind. The three dimensions combined in cube: above, below, left, right, in front, behind. The eye orients itself in space according to three dimensions. It judges its position in this space according to the concepts above, below, left hand, right hand, in front, behind. Transposed to the surface, our spatial picture looks like this. For the sake of precision, we take a cubic space with fixed boundaries. On the left, right line, the position is computed according to the distance from the left or right hand bounding plane or from an intermediate point. On the horizontal plane, the distance to the front or back is also measured or estimated. The position in space is also computed by reference to the upper and lower plane. In above, below, the downward direction predominates. The upward drive operates only as a corollary to the downward pull, or attraction of the Earth. This is the real force. The upward drive is secondary. In left-right attraction of heat, the direction is free and the drive towards heat may predominate, accent on the direction from left to right. In behind in front, the forward direction is also free and the forward drive may predominate, accent on the direction from behind to in front. If we consider direction or movement, we obtain the following result. 1. Dimension, left-right, movement each way. 2. Dimension, above-below, parallel movement. 3. Dimension, front-back, movement and counter-movement. Movement and counter-movement in which a clash is possible. In answer to the question, where does it enter, we measure height, width, length or depth, and displacement in relation to the norm. The forward drive combined with direction, heat, attraction of Earth, striving forward. Dimensional directions in the eye, feeling of warmth, line of sight, stance. Village in the rain, pen and ink drawing. Two directions of movement overlap in a rhythmic combination of forms. 0. Reworked in 1936. Fish in Circle. Oil. 1926. The relation of the pictorial components to one another and to the whole. Fish in Circle, 1926. Example of the problems of articulation in pictorial space. Balance between directions of movement in a circle. Example of articulation in a circle. Applied exercise from diagrams within square and circle. Questions of articulation in pictorial space. In painting, the picture should be regarded as the object. The picture is the whole. The parts should be evaluated in relation to the whole, that is, in relation to the picture. This makes format of foremost importance. But it does not exclude the so-called object in the traditional sense, and even in the good old masters, objects must always be judged as parts of the whole picture. This fish is an object in the old sense, while from the modern point of view, it is part of the picture. Picture body, format. Fish body, fish space. Parts of the fish body, A, B, C. 4 outer pictorial limits of space, D, E, F, G. Or 4 corners of space, the inner boundaries of the fish, H, I, K, L. House, outside and inside, watercolor, 1930. Transparent, polyphonic interpretation of the inside and outside. overlapping of simultaneous representations of ground plan and elevation. Orientation in pictorial space. Practical considerations in regard to space. The spatial character of the plane is imaginary. Often it represents a conflict for the painter. He does not wish to treat the third dimension illusionistically. Today, a flat effect is often sought in painting, but if different parts of the plane are given different values, it is hard to avoid a certain effect of depth. If everything remains perfectly flat, we might under certain circumstances have a good carpet. If it does not remain flat, we come to the formal problem of the third dimension. One of the artist's basic problems is how to enlarge space. We do it by means of overlapping planes. In this way, we can create the illusion of larger and smaller planes in depth. Side by side, one behind the other, overlapping, interpenetrating. If we compare the steps, we tend to see differences in them. The mere facts of a side by side and one behind the other argue the presence of behind in front. Here, even boundaries are spatial, and progression always produces an effect of depth. Even after the Renaissance, perspective was used in the enlargement of space. It is an intellectual device. There have been other experiments with exact method in art, exotopic and endotopic treatment by flooding and tapering off in color. All this is a struggle for space. The struggle is not determined by outward necessity, the aim is inward. It encompasses a number of things, including the ultimate problems of space. Instead of problems, we might say a certain mystery. Simple things can also present a problem. We must ponder a great many factors that all culminate in the problem, the mystery. Once extension in one of the two dimensions is brought out sharply, we have the impression of a plane. It brings with it a tendency to orient oneself by this dimension. Major, minor, large, or small components, brilliance, darkness, behind, in front. And so the desire or need to bring in a third dimension gives rise to very simple artistic contrasts. If what we designate as the main object is not in the foreground but in between, and similar things lie in front and behind, as regards the third dimension, we shall have three different frontal planes. Then the main action takes place in the middle, through its relation to the frontal planes behind and in front. There is a conceivable bridge between the foremost and the hindmost, so the middle is not free. We see that there is an element of unclarity in the dimensions. The notion of fluid space with a fourth imaginary dimension, time, makes nothing clearer. These intellectual constructions require exact clarification if they are to serve as an artistic law. Houses at Crossroads, watercolor. Endotopic and exotopic treatment with a view to simultaneous interpretation. The movement of boundary contrast, says Klee, is brought out in different ways. Sometimes we have an endotopic treatment aimed to produce contrast on the boundary, and sometimes an exotopic treatment. Sometimes the endotopic center receives a special new emphasis. A conflict arises between endo and exotopic. Then we have a sort of mesh of forms. The simultaneous treatment of inside and outside points to the concept of simultaneity, of contacts between many dimensions. Endotopic, exotopic. These two principles of the positive negative treatment of relief applied to linear figures containing intersections. Rule: in handling boundary contrast, always stay on one side of the line. Square endotopic treatment. Square exotopic treatment. Square treated as a body without reference to inside or outside. Corner endotopic treatment. Corner exotopic treatment. Movement from black to white. White in front, black. Counter movement from white to black. Black behind. The two movements taken together, movement and counter movement in the dimension. If we call to mind Klee's statement, the depth of our surface is imaginary, it follows that without a perspective viewpoint in space, the relations on the scene have to be organized. This proves necessary if we wish to indicate clearly the directions of motion. We have a three-dimensional space when tone, value, or color is added to a linear plane figure. Here, Klee's conception of the third dimension differs appreciably from the generally held notions of space and dimension. It is based on the space-time unit, which covers completely every movement. The step that the eye takes from a lighter inner point of the surface to a darker outer one presupposes motion from inside to out, or vice versa, from fore to rear. Santa A at B, pen and pencil drawing. These different treatments, the endotopic and the exotopic, are diametrically opposed to one another. Expressions of energy are based on contrast. This contrast between endotopic and exotopic treatment applies not only to the way it actually works, but also to the function that is set in motion. What is treated exotopically on the picture plane tends to stand out. What is treated endotopically tends to recede. This brings us to the third dimension. But there are exceptions to all general principles. Sometimes it becomes impossible to say that something really goes back or comes a little farther back or forward. This is the relief style. Through it is expressed slight movement in the foreground. The endotopic and exotopic activation lessens the objective element and brings up the possibilities of boundary contrast. A work is three-dimensional when its outside and inside can be clearly differentiated, when height, width, length, or depth may be measured on the basis of a norm. Spatial study, rational connections, pencil drawing from the series Studies in Three Dimensions. In a plane, the norms are coordinates. In cubic space, the norm is distance from the center. Orientation in pictorial space is achieved through the idea that the work is a mirror image of the eye, and moreover, an upright image of an eye that stands. The upright eye and the work look each other in the face. Because the eye is assumed to be upright, the dimension above, below, remains the same both in the eye and in the work. If the mirror, for example, were not upright but fixed horizontally to the floor or ceiling, the dimension above, below would seem the wrong way round according to the mirror image. The next dimension, left, right, appears in the same direction in the work, the mirror man. But if I raise my left hand, the mirror man raises his right hand. If I advance my right leg, the mirror man responds with his left. This logical reversal becomes important on the stage where real human beings face us, though they seem reflected in a mirror. When the stage script says left, it has to make clear, therefore, whether it means to the left of the audience or of the stage. The diagrams relating to the orientation of the eye in pictorial space start from an ideal center, common to the eye and to the work. Every movement in illusionistic flat space stands in relation to the natural sense of direction of the eye and to the center of the work. The resulting relations are significant, especially for an exact description of the directions of motion, and replace the concepts of foreground, middle ground, and background, which are not applicable to a non-representational picture. It is possible to single out the unique by normal means, by way of movement or articulation. The dynamic is in the action. It moves. It is not static being, but process. Relatively predominant being and relatively recessive being. By way of contrast, the fixation of developing motion in a precise moment. If localities tend towards the center, there is a psychological reason for it. The rational and the less rational are mixed. The meaning of this law is that a simple natural scene is given and that in this natural scene one particular thing is emphasized. The weight on the center stresses the deviation from the norm. The arrow as active agent in the many-sided motion of the total scene. The third dimension, in front, behind, corresponds for the eye and for the mirror man both in fact and in appearance, but the directions are opposed. To sum up, the beholder of the picture should imagine that he has his mirror image before him. Then he can assume that the dimensions above, below, and left hand, right hand in the picture run in the same direction as his own dimensions, but that as far as the dimension in front, behind is concerned, the directions are reversed. In a manner of speaking, they meet him halfway. The picture as mirror image of the creative artist, the dimensional concepts are made to fit him. I and the picture look each other in the face. Left hand, right hand, in front, below change places. Above, below remains stationary. Facsimile page from the theory of articulation with stress on the major-minor function. 50 days and 50 nights. Among them 3 hot days and 4 cool days, minor.